speech, the 3 a.m. call that changed everything. It was 3:00 in the morning. The streets were hushed, blanketed by a restless silence that only cities know. She lay asleep on a torn mattress, a blanket barely covering her legs from the night's chill. Her alarm wasn't set for hours yet. Her shift wouldn't begin until dawn. But her phone rang. Half asleep, she answered. The voice on the other end was hurried, scared, and confused. "Please, we need help. Grandma can't breathe. She's turning blue. We don't know what to do." The address came quickly, then the line went dead. She blinked. The caller hadn't asked for her by name. They hadn't even said nurse. But something in her gut clenched. "I think they dialed the wrong number," she whispered. She could have gone back to bed. After all, she wasn't on duty. No one would have blamed her. But something deeper stirred inside her, the sacred call of compassion. She wrapped a scarf around her shoulders, grabbed her worn-out medical bag, and headed into the cold. By the time she reached the address, the door was flung open, and a family in chaos surrounded her. No one asked who she was. They just saw her stethoscope and made way. In the corner, an elderly woman gasped for air, her face pale and lips tinged with blue. The nurse didn't panic. She didn't pause to explain. She moved with calm, practiced hands. Oxygen, posture, breath count, pulse check. She whispered softly to the woman, like a lullaby, and slowly the breathing returned. Color came back to the woman's face. The crisis passed. Only after it was all over did someone finally ask, "Wait, who are you?" She smiled faintly. "I think you called the wrong number." The room fell silent. The next morning, she returned to her hospital shift like always. She didn't mention what had happened. She didn't expect thanks. It was just something she had to do, but someone had noticed. That same evening, she received another call. A calm, clear voice introduced himself as the grandson of the elderly woman. He had traced her back through the address caller logs. He had watched the way she worked. Silently, steadily, selflessly. "You weren't supposed to be there," he said, "but I think you were meant to be there." Over time, their conversations deepened. What started as gratitude grew into admiration, and then into love. Today, she stands not just as a nurse, but as a wife, a mother, and an advocate for emergency response education. That one wrong call led to the right path, for 2 souls who never saw it coming, but none of it would have happened if she had stayed in bed. Educational takeaways: never underestimate your value in someone else's crisis. Whether or not you're assigned to help, your willingness can change lives. Train your heart to act even when your mind hesitates. Logic says go back to sleep. Love says go help. You don't need wealth to serve, just a heart that cares. The nurse had no riches, no fanfare, just deep compassion. Kindness doesn't need an audience, but sometimes the right person is watching anyway. Our greatest moments are often hidden inside interruptions. The wrong number was the right miracle in disguise. True compassion doesn't wait for an invitation. It doesn't ask, "Is this my job?" or "Will I be rewarded?" It doesn't pause to consider if recognition will follow, or if the effort will be seen. Compassion acts because it must. It moves because it cannot sit still in the presence of suffering. It shows up, even when no one calls it by name, even when the road is unfamiliar, even when the clock reads 3:00 a.m. Imagine being asleep after a long day of work. Your body is tired, your resources stretched thin. You work as a nurse, earning just enough to cover the essentials. You've already planned the next morning. Another exhausting shift awaits. But suddenly your phone rings. The voice on the other end is panicked, crying, desperate. It's not your patient. They didn't even mean to call you, but they need help. Something in their voice, in their breathless fear, reaches deep into your spirit. You could have said, "I'm sorry, wrong number," and gone back to sleep. You could have reasoned, "I'm not their nurse. It's not my responsibility." But real compassion doesn't work on contracts. It works on calling. And so she went. In the middle of the night, wrapped in the cold darkness of uncertainty, she stepped into her purpose. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. That's what true compassion is. It's a choice we make not just when it's convenient, but precisely when it's not. It's what pushes a tired nurse out of bed, into the street toward a stranger's pain. When she arrived, she didn't demand to know who called her. She didn't ask, "Why me?" She didn't lecture the family about the wrong number. Instead, she acted. She moved with grace, with speed, with kindness. No validation needed. No guarantee of thanks. Compassion, when real, is its own reward. It lives in that sacred space between service and sacrifice, and most beautifully, it doesn't discriminate. She didn't ask about race, income, religion, or insurance. She saw a human in need, and that was enough. Too often in today's world, we wait to be invited before we act. We think compassion is only for those we know. That kindness should be structured, official, or scheduled. But suffering doesn't wait for appointments. It doesn't knock politely. It crashes, it floods, it screams. And in those moments, the world doesn't need rules. It needs people who are willing to answer, even if the call was never meant for them. There's something deeply beautiful about helping someone who doesn't expect it. There's something powerful about showing up in silence, without fanfare, and doing what's right simply because your heart says, "Go." That kind of compassion is rare, and yet it is what holds humanity together. It's what allows strangers to become saviors. It's what turns wrong numbers into divine appointments. This story of the nurse isn't just about heroism, it's about everyday choices, because all of us receive calls, some metaphorical, some literal. They come as interruptions, inconveniences, or wrong numbers. They challenge our comfort zones and test the limits of our empathy. The question is not whether we are qualified. The question is whether we are willing. Because you don't have to be a nurse to save a life. You don't have to be rich to give something meaningful. You don't need a degree to care. You just need a heart that refuses to look away. True compassion doesn't wait for a title. It doesn't wait for a perfect moment. It shows up anyway. It answers the wrong call at 3 a.m., and somehow it always arrives right on time. Purpose is often found in unplanned moments. We spend much of our lives trying to plan every step, our careers, our relationships, our dreams. We map out timelines, set goals, and try to control the direction of our journey. And yet, some of the most life-changing moments do not come from meticulous planning. They arrive unexpectedly, often disguised as inconveniences, disruptions, or mistakes. A wrong number, a sudden detour, a stranger's need. What feels like an interruption may in fact be the very moment we step into our deeper purpose. That's exactly what happened to the nurse who received a panicked phone call at 3:00 a.m. The caller was desperate for help. An elderly woman was struggling to breathe, and the family didn't know what to do. But the call wasn't meant for her. It was a mistake, a misdialed number in the middle of the night. She could have turned over in her bed, silenced the phone, and gone back to sleep. No one would have blamed her. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't responsible. The call wasn't even for her. But something in her soul told her to go. And so she did. She showed up, not knowing what she would find, not knowing who had called, not even sure if they would let her in. But when she arrived, she saw chaos, fear, and confusion. And she did what she was trained to do. More importantly, she did what she was called to do, not by protocol, but by purpose. That night, she didn't just save a life. She stepped into a moment that would change her own. Purpose is not always loud. It's not always announced with certainty. Sometimes it begins in confusion. It begins when you're unsure, when you think, "This isn't for me." But something inside you nudges you forward anyway. Many people spend their entire lives searching for purpose, believing it is a destination they must one day arrive at. But purpose is often revealed when we are simply willing to respond, especially when there's no clear reason to. This is what makes purpose so sacred. It can find you in the most unlikely places, in the middle of exhaustion, in the depth of poverty, in the silence of the night. You don't have to be prepared for it. You just have to be open to it. The nurse in this story wasn't ready to be a hero that night. She wasn't expecting to change anyone's life, but she said yes to the moment, and that yes made all the difference. Sometimes we think that purpose must be tied to big achievements, that it only shows up when we're successful or well-positioned. But what if purpose actually shows up most clearly when we are vulnerable? When we're off script, when everything feels uncertain, that's when our character has room to lead us. That's when our hearts have the opportunity to choose service over sleep, kindness over comfort. That one wrong call led the nurse not only to save a stranger's life, but also into a path she never expected. Her selfless act was noticed, appreciated, admired. The family she helped never forgot her quiet courage. And one member of that family, the grandson, felt something shift in his own soul. What began as a thank you evolved into a friendship, and then into something deeper. Love was planted in that soil of selflessness. A future was born out of a mistake. We cannot always predict what the next moment holds. We cannot script every detail of our journey, but we can choose how we show up in each moment. We can choose to answer even the unexpected calls. And in doing so, we often discover that the unplanned moments are the most purposeful ones of all, not because we orchestrated them, but because we trusted them, and because we were brave enough to say yes when everything inside us said, "You don't have to." Purpose does not always come with clarity. It often comes with risk, with humility, with a quiet voice whispering, "Go." And when we answer that whisper, we may just find that we've walked straight into the reason we were here all along. Serving without expectation plants the seeds of grace. In a world driven by transactions, where so much of what we do is tied to what we'll get in return, true service stands apart. It's rare. It's sacred. It's the kind of act that speaks not from the lips, but from the soul. When someone gives not because they are paid to, not because it brings fame, and not even because they are asked, but simply because it is the right thing to do, that is where grace takes root. And grace, once planted, grows in quiet, powerful ways. The story of the nurse begins in such a moment. She was poor, not just in income but in energy, in rest, in resources. She had worked long hours. She had nothing extra to give, but at 3 a.m., when the call came in, a call never meant for her, she didn't ask, "What's in this for me?" She didn't hesitate to weigh the personal cost. She didn't need applause, credit, or reward. She served because someone needed help, and that was enough. She took her medical bag, put on her coat, and stepped into the cold night. Alone, quiet, tired, but determined. When she arrived, she didn't declare who she was. She didn't demand validation. She saw the elderly woman struggling to breathe, and she simply did what she had been trained to do, what her heart told her to do. No one there knew her name. No one had even called her, and yet she gave her all, calmly, skillfully, gently. This is the power of serving without expectation. It moves differently. It carries a quiet authority. It reaches into people's lives and touches something deep and eternal. Because when people are in pain, they don't remember the name on the uniform. They remember the hands that held them, the eyes that stayed calm, the heart that didn't look away, and those acts, though done in silence, echo louder than any speech. What the nurse didn't know was that her act of grace was being observed, not by a crowd, not by a camera, but by a single soul whose heart would be forever changed. The grandson of the elderly woman watched her. He watched her care without question. He watched her serve with no need for praise, and something in him shifted. The world is full of noise, but when you witness true service, pure and without condition, it silences the noise. It speaks to something deeper. Over the next days he found her. He thanked her, but the gratitude didn't stop at words. A connection formed, genuine, honest, unexpected. A bond grew between two people who had met in a moment of crisis, but were united by something more profound, the recognition of character, of selflessness, of grace. What began as a mistake, a wrong number, became a meeting ground for lives destined to intertwine. And at the center of it all was a simple truth. When we give without expecting, life often gives back in ways we could never have planned. The nurse did not go that night hoping to meet anyone. She didn't serve in hopes of being noticed. She simply answered a call with no return address, but Grace saw her. Grace remembered. This is what makes unselfish service so powerful. You may not get a thank you. You may never see the fruits of your labor. But the universe remembers, people remember, and often life responds not on our schedule, but at the right time. through healing, through connection, through a future we could never have imagined. To serve without expectation is to trust in a deeper order of life. It's to believe that doing good is not just about the present moment. It's about planting something eternal, something that can grow into peace, into love, into destiny. The nurse planted such a seed that night. And because she did, lives would change, including her own. When you serve with open hands and no conditions, you unlock doors no effort alone could ever open. Because grace doesn't respond to performance, it responds to the heart. And in the end, those who give freely often receive the most lasting gifts of all. Poverty is not the absence of wealth, but the presence of limitation. It's not only about what's missing in your wallet, but what systems, circumstances, and hardships limit your opportunities. Being poor doesn't mean you lack value, intelligence, or strength. It simply means you've had to fight harder, stretch further, and believe deeper just to survive. But poverty, in its many forms, can also be a teacher, a painful but powerful one. It teaches resourcefulness, resilience, and above all, compassion. Those who know the pain of going without often become the ones most willing to give. The nurse in this story understood that truth well. Her life wasn't cushioned by luxury. She lived modestly, barely enough to cover her basic needs. Rent was a constant worry. Her shoes were worn from long hospital shifts. Her coat was too thin for cold nights. But she carried something far more valuable than money. She carried heart. She knew what it meant to need help and not know where it would come from. She knew the sting of being invisible, overlooked, and underestimated. That kind of experience doesn't harden everyone. Sometimes it softens the soul. Sometimes it creates a fire not to escape alone, but to lift others along the way. That's why, when the wrong number rang at 3:00 a.m., she didn't hesitate. She had every reason to stay in bed. Her back ached from yesterday's shift. Her next one would begin in just a few hours. No one would know if she ignored the call, and still, she went. Not because she had extra to give, but because she knew how it felt to need someone and have no one come. Poverty had trained her to live without many things, but it hadn't touched her compassion. If anything, it had refined it. Some might have asked, why would someone with so little give so much? The answer lies in understanding that giving is not measured by the size of your bank account, but by the size of your heart. The poor can still be rich in kindness, in empathy, in service. She arrived at that unfamiliar home with nothing but her medical bag and her weary soul. And yet, she gave care as if the patient were her own mother. She spoke gently. She worked quickly. She didn't need praise. She didn't calculate hours or effort. She just knew that someone was suffering and she could help. That was enough. That's the kind of wealth the world needs more of. We live in a society that often glorifies financial success and equates poverty with failure, but that narrative is deeply flawed. Some of the kindest, strongest, most capable people come from backgrounds of struggle. They know how to stretch a dollar, how to make something out of nothing, and, more importantly, how to see others with compassion. They don't overlook people in pain because they've been there themselves. The nurse didn't go to that house expecting anything in return, but life has a way of recognizing silent service. The grandson who saw her that night didn't see a poor nurse. He saw courage. He saw someone who could have walked away but didn't. He saw a heart that knew how to love without condition, and in that moment, something awakened in him. Compassion has a power that transcends appearances. It speaks to the soul. It connects people in ways that go beyond class, status, or circumstance. And so, from that night grew a relationship, built not on wealth but on character, on the understanding that true richness comes from how we treat others, especially when we have little ourselves. The woman he fell in love with wasn't wealthy. She was something greater, selfless, brave, and profoundly human. This story is not just about a heroic nurse. It is about challenging our view of poverty. It is about recognizing that those with the least often give the most. That limitation doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've carried weight others never had to. And sometimes it means you've developed a strength that money could never buy. So the next time we measure success, let us not forget to measure heart. Because in the end, it's not your possessions that define you, it's your purpose. And this nurse, though poor by the world's standards, lived a life of immeasurable wealth. Love has a way of finding us in the most unexpected moments. It doesn't always walk through the front door with fanfare and perfect timing. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, through the back door of service, through the cracks of a chaotic night, or in the middle of a mistaken phone call. We often think love comes after everything is planned, when we're ready, secure, and open. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes love arrives disguised as duty, sacrifice, or coincidence. And when it does, it often brings with it a kind of depth and beauty that no grand romantic gesture could ever replace. That's what happened on that cold night when a tired nurse answered a call never meant for her. She didn't know that by stepping into a stranger's crisis, she was also stepping into her own story of love. There was no music playing, no flowers, no signs, just a confused voice on the other end of the phone, and a weary nurse who answered with nothing but her heart. She didn't expect anything in return, not even thanks. She was simply doing what compassion called her to do. She walked into a dark house not looking for connection, but offering care. But someone was watching her. Someone who didn't even know her name. The grandson, frightened and anxious, saw something in her that night that went beyond the act of medical help. He saw grace. He saw strength. He saw someone willing to show up in a moment of need without being asked, without expecting reward, and without even knowing the people she was helping. In her, he saw the rarest kind of beauty, the kind that reveals itself when no one is trying to impress. She was real, and in a world full of pretense, that kind of authenticity shines the brightest. The days that followed were filled with silent memories of that night. He couldn't forget the way she moved, the calm in her voice, the warmth in her presence. And when he finally found the courage to reach out and thank her, something stirred in both of them. It wasn't forced, it wasn't planned. It was just two people brought together by a moment neither of them asked for, but both of them needed. She too was surprised by the connection. She had been too busy surviving to think about love, too tired to imagine someone noticing her in that way. But life saw her, and so did he. Their bond didn't form overnight. It grew quietly, like a seed planted in the dark soil of an unexpected night. They talked, they listened, they laughed. He learned about her life, her struggles, her passion for helping others. She learned about his heart, his family, and his capacity for gratitude. What brought them together was not a shared background or lifestyle. It was a shared moment of truth, a shared value for humanity, a shared sense of purpose. Love, at its best, is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about seeing someone in their rawest, most honest state and choosing them anyway. The nurse had nothing to offer that the world would call glamorous, but she had something deeper: integrity, compassion, courage. And in her quiet humility, he found the kind of partner he never even knew he was searching for. This story reminds us that love is not always born from romance. Sometimes it is born from sacrifice, from late nights and wrong turns, from helping without being asked, from the willingness to care even when there is no clear reason to. And when love grows from that kind of soil, it is unshakable. It is not about what someone gives you, but who they choose to be, especially when no one is watching. We often try to script love, to predict it, to chase it in all the places it's supposed to be. But the truth is, love tends to show up when we are simply being ourselves, doing what we are called to do, and living with kindness. The nurse wasn't looking for love. She was simply answering a call. But by answering that call, she opened the door to something much greater. And so, what began as a wrong number became the right connection. A mistake became a miracle. A single act of selflessness became the foundation for a lifelong bond. That's the beauty of love. It finds you, often when you least expect it, and it stays, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. Sometimes, a single decision made in a moment of uncertainty can change the entire direction of your life. We often underestimate the weight of small choices. We think life's turning points are marked with banners, big decisions, and dramatic declarations. But often, it's a quiet yes in the middle of the night. It's a simple act of courage that doesn't feel extraordinary in the moment, but later becomes the thread that weaves everything together. A wrong call, a tired nurse, a decision to show up anyway. These are the kinds of moments that alter destinies. That night, the nurse could have chosen rest. She had every right to ignore the call. It wasn't her patient. It wasn't even her problem. The number wasn't meant for her. She could have rolled over, silenced the phone, and drifted back to sleep, unknown and unnoticed. But something inside her wouldn't let her. That small inner voice, the one shaped by years of compassion, responsibility, and instinct, whispered, "Go." And she listened. That single decision didn't just change one life. It changed many. She showed up, did what she could, and expected nothing in return. But that act of service, born out of instinct and empathy, sent ripples into lives she never imagined. The family she helped was touched deeply. They remembered her, respected her, admired her, and one among them, the Grants, carried that memory in his heart long after the emergency had passed. One decision opened the door to a future she never saw coming. She hadn't planned for love. She hadn't dreamed of recognition. She was simply living with purpose. But life has a way of rewarding those who answer their callings, even when they go unnoticed by the world. The nurse's journey was marked not by grand achievements, but by simple consistency, by choosing compassion over comfort, duty over convenience. And that consistency, that decision to respond, changed her forever. Every person reaches crossroads in life, times when they can turn back or move forward, stay safe or take a risk. These moments don't always come with warning signs. Often, they are hidden within ordinary circumstances. A ringing phone, a stranger's request, a need that presents itself unexpectedly. And the truth is, you won't always know which decisions are pivotal until you look back. But if you live with intention, if you make your choices with integrity and heart, you'll find that the right path reveals itself, one decision at a time. The nurse didn't know she was walking into a defining chapter of her story. She didn't have the foresight to see what would come next. She simply acted in alignment with who she was, and that was enough. Because when you act from your core values, when your decisions are guided by who you truly are rather than what you might gain, the outcome often surpasses anything you could have imagined. Her choice to go that night changed the way she saw herself. It reminded her of her strength. It renewed her faith in human connection. It led her to a man who saw not her paycheck, but her soul. It opened her heart to love, not because she was searching for it, but because she was living truthfully. All of this from a moment that, to most people, would have looked insignificant. So many of us wait for the big moments to define us. We wait for the opportunity, the recognition, the spotlight. But life is shaped by the unseen decisions, by what we do when no one is watching, when the outcome is uncertain, when we're tired and unsure. And if we choose well in those moments, they become the foundation for everything that follows. The nurse's story reminds us that the life we dream of isn't waiting at the end of a perfectly planned journey. It's built in the here and now, in the unexpected calls, in the unglamorous choices, in the quiet yes. And sometimes, when we least expect it, that one decision made in faith, with no guarantee, becomes the turning point that changes everything.